for the average person, the quality of life in the Netherlands is one of the highest in the world, and it is higher than the US.
How do you see the differences between the US and the Netherlands?
In the Netherlands, it's about having enough. In the US, it's a culture where it's about more. I've also seen Dutch people to be less optimistic than Americans, whereas Americans are, oh, let's try this, let's go big. I find Dutch people to be less optimistic, more reserved, but more calculated as well. The Dutch do have higher tax rates, but you do see where the taxes go towards. Things like social programs, infrastructure.
California, for example, where you're from, relatively high tax rates, right? But no free healthcare, not a lot of public transit options, no free education. Where is the money going in California?
That's a good question.
So if we could take it back to the beginning with you, David, and just kind of hear your origin story, that would be great. Like, where are you from originally? Where did you grow up?
Yeah, we take it back. Born and raised in San Francisco, California, grew up there, spent 10 years in LA where I went to school, started my career. And I would say my origin story starts in LA when I first studied abroad. I was around 18 or so. And so I come from immigrant Chinese parents, and growing up, we spoke Cantonese. But growing up, I have always had this identity crisis and always wanted to learn the Mandarin language. So I started learning Mandarin in college, and went to study abroad in Shanghai. And that was actually my first time abroad by myself. But that opened up my eyes to traveling, opened up my eyes to the world. And ever since then, I started studying abroad pretty much every year after that. The next year after that, I went to Taiwan again to learn Chinese. And then the year after that, I went to Spain to not to learn Chinese, but it was a study abroad for international tax, which is what I studied as well. And from there, I always, wanted to live abroad again, but forgot about that dream. After college, went the corporate route, worked in corporate America. And then I think in 2015, that was probably a life-changing moment in my life. Due to things in corporate, I felt like things at work weren't aligned with my values. And I took the first opportunity that came to me, which was actually in Zimbabwe. And so then the next year, I spent about a year working, volunteering, and traveling across Africa, the Middle East, and Asia. After that, came back to San Francisco Bay Area, worked in startups, tech, was trying to figure out my life, was in this phase of my life, and it seems to never end, of trying to figure out meaning and purpose and what I want to put my time into. I tried a few things and it still wasn't it. But I always had this dream of living in Europe because I had studied abroad. Especially in Spain. When I lived in Spain, I met a bunch of Europeans. I've always met Europeans traveling and was intrigued by the European way of life, and tried to find a job in Europe, but it's actually quite difficult if you're not, for example, a software engineer. I was also trying to change my career at the same time. I almost found this job in London, actually. It would have been a dream job. I got to the final round. It was a job with Google in London, but they didn't take me. But I found out that I could study abroad again, do a master's, and that would be my gateway into Europe. So I found a program in the Netherlands, a 1 year program. I thought, what the heck, it's 1 year. It was also a study program that I was interested in. It was something called learning and development, so training, coaching, facilitation. I thought, okay, if it doesn't work out, it's only 1 year. It's also a lot cheaper than American education, wait, a lot cheaper. So I decided, investment wise, if it doesn't work out, it'd be a nice, 1 year break as well. So I went, I got in, to a program. I went to a small, I call it a town, but it's actually a city, Maastricht in the south of the Netherlands. I studied there, loved the program, and after that, found a job in Amsterdam and moved up there. Yeah. And so, yeah, 1 year turned to 7 years. So that's a bit of my origin story.
Wow, so you've kind of been all over the place. You've been to a lot of different countries.
Yeah, travel and cultures, they've always been a big part of my life, especially the past 15 years.
And so, like, your initial motivation, that first study abroad that you did in Shanghai, was that you mentioned you had a bit of an identity crisis. Was that a way for you to connect with your roots, with your Chinese heritage? Or what was the initial motivation to go abroad?
Yeah, it was initially, I was studying the Chinese language at the same time. And a friend, I believe it was a friend who brought up the idea, oh, there's a study abroad we can go to. So initially it was for fun. It's like, oh, cool. I mean, I can go learn Chinese, not in the States, but in China. And secondly, but related to that, more importantly, was because I originally studied Chinese because I wanted to get closer to my roots. I grew up speaking Cantonese, but never spoke the Mandarin language. So in college, I wanted to minor in that. And yeah, just to get closer to my roots. And I remember going to Shanghai for the first time. That was a big culture shock. It was my first time abroad in China without family, parents, and so I remember taking the taxi to the university, and at that time I could understand Mandarin, but I couldn't speak it. And I was taking the taxi, and this guy, a really friendly guy, you know, was just telling me about Shanghai. This was back in 2008, the Olympics in Beijing, and he was telling me about how much China has changed over the years, the development. And, he went on and on for 15 minutes, and, I could only understand and nod. And then he finally asked me, hey, how come you don't speak? And then I told him in the basic Mandarin that I knew that I was there to learn Chinese because I'm an overseas Chinese. And I remember he couldn't understand that concept of being an overseas Chinese. And then he said to me like, "Oh, you look like me, the color of your eyes, your hair, your skin, but you don't speak the language. You must be Japanese or Korean." Uh, so I remember that moment vividly gave me an even bigger identity crisis than I already had. But yeah, I've always been interested in cultures, but that moment and that summer really changed my life going forward.
It is interesting how we kind of make assumptions about people based on the way that they look, right? We look at someone and say, well, if you look like this, you probably speak this language, or you might be where I'm from. And I noticed that, here in Canada, it's a very diverse country, right? People from all over the world. And because I'm interested in languages and I've had the opportunity to learn some languages, I'm sensitive to people who may not speak English very well because I know what it's like to struggle to communicate. And so when I talk to people who I perceive might be from a different country, I kind of subconsciously find myself trying to speak clearly. I want to facilitate communication as much as I can. And with people who I think might be, native speakers or might speak English very well, I speak much faster. And I do it really without thinking. But I remember I went to this coffee shop one time and I, same kind of thing. I saw the cashier and said, oh, she's probably Canadian. And I just rapid fired my order at her really quickly. And then she went, sorry, what? And she didn't understand. And then I think she was from like Europe or something. Maybe she was Ukrainian. And I went, oh my, I just because she was this, blonde hair, white person, I assumed that she was just another Canadian. I made that assumption about her, and with that, which language I thought she spoke, but I was completely wrong. We can really be deceived by the way people look. And I think in a country where it's very homogenous, like in China, it's probably even more extreme, right? Like if you look Chinese and you're in China, why would you not speak Chinese, right? Like that would be the assumption that people would make.
Oh yeah. I mean, I've had certain instances, especially at the beginning when my Chinese was pretty poor, where we travel around, in a study abroad group, and then if I'm especially if I'm in a group with other non-Asians, or say I remember a white guy who spoke better Chinese than me, it would be such confusion in a restaurant when they would look to me to order, but then it was the white guy who spoke better Chinese than me. And so it caused a lot of confusion. I would have that also here in the States as well. My first job, I was a consultant, not language wise, but I would travel to Middle America, to these really small towns where they may not have seen an Asian person before. And whenever I walked in the door of a restaurant, I remember I would get a lot of looks, really friendly looks. I love the Midwest. But again, it was such a shock for me as well, because growing up in California, especially a place like San Francisco, the Bay Area, 30% of the region is Asian. But going into the Midwest, these really small towns of 600 people, yeah, that was definitely a culture shock for me. So culture shock and differences, a core part of my identity in life.
Uh-huh. Yeah, that you've been exposed to that from a young age, differences in culture and identity. That's interesting. So like at home, you guys always spoke Cantonese with each other.
Yeah, Cantonese was my first language, and then went to Chinese school to learn Cantonese as well. But when you're 8, 9 years old, you don't want to learn. You don't want to go to English school and then, Chinese school. But it was when I was 18 where I really started learning the Chinese language and having like real intrinsic motivation to learn.
And you wanted to learn Mandarin specifically because it would allow you to speak with more people in China than Cantonese?
Well, at that time, the number one reason was to connect more to my roots and my culture. And number two was, even at that time, they said if you want to learn a language, you should learn Chinese just because China is up and coming. Which, if we look at where China is today, it's true.
I mean, I've heard people say that that you should learn a language because it would be very useful in this way or that way. I find that that typically isn't enough motivation for the average person. Like if you just say, hey, one day you might be working for a Chinese company, you should start learning Chinese today. Most people are going to be like, yeah, okay, I'll worry about that when I am at that place. Or, there might be an investment opportunity in China or in another country. You should start learning the language today. I mean, I think people need to see the benefit right now to really have enough motivation to carry them through the long process of learning a language, right? But for you, was it a little bit easier learning Mandarin because you already spoke Cantonese?
Yes, it was a lot easier for me compared to people who didn't know any Chinese at all, because growing up, I did learn the characters in Chinese school. So it was easier. Also, Cantonese is a more difficult language to speak than Mandarin. So, yes, it was easier for me to learn.
Hmm. Yeah, Cantonese has more tones, right?
Yeah, I think what is like 8 or 9 tones, and Mandarin has 4 tones. But going back to the intrinsic why, I had a really big why to learn, especially after that story I told you about the taxi ride in Shanghai. I just felt such a big identity crisis if I'm not Chinese. I felt extremely Chinese, especially growing up in America, but in China, I didn't feel Chinese at all. So then I asked myself, like, who am I? And I've learned language is a big part of culture. So I, really wanted to learn the language, especially because I am Chinese as well.
Yeah, the connection that comes with language is really unmatched. Even like for someone like me who, like the first language I learned was Tagalog or Filipino. Obviously, I don't have any heritage from there, but speaking with people in their native language opened up so many doors that otherwise would have been left closed. So yeah, it really makes a huge difference. You also mentioned that you were interested in a European lifestyle, or what life in Europe would be like. And so then you ended up in the Netherlands later on, also another study abroad. It seems like you've done a lot of study abroads.
Oh, yeah, it's been 4 different times. Yeah, like it seems like every decade I'm studying abroad somewhere new.
And that's a great way to do it because it does offer a certain amount of structure as opposed to going on your own, right? Usually the university that you're with can kind of help you find a place to live, and, going to classes exposes you to people that could become your future friends. And so how did you decide specifically on the Netherlands then? Like, you were interested in Europe as a whole, but what was different about the Netherlands?
What was different about the Netherlands? Well, the main thing that drove me to look into the Netherlands was that job at Google that I didn't get. The hiring manager, he was also from California. And I remember how he got into Europe was actually studying in the Netherlands. So that's how I started first with the Netherlands. Like, oh, this guy also from California got into, Europe via the Netherlands. So that's how I started investigating the Netherlands. And the more that I learned about the country, the more I knew this was probably a country for me because one, the Dutch have the highest English proficiency out of any other country where English is the second language. So it would be easy or easier for a foreigner like me to just go and study there. Also, they have the highest amount of English programs in, I believe, Europe, and I believe like 70 to 80% of their master's programs are all English only. So, yeah, it was because of the job I didn't get. I also talked to the hiring manager, that guy, and he told me it was a great place to study. So I was like, hey, what the heck?
And so, like, all of the classes that you took were in English.
Yeah, all in English. And the school I went to, Maastricht University, it's known for being a very international school. So in my program, it was a small program. I think we only had around 30 something people, but from, all over Europe and all over the world as well. So very multicultural.
So how does that work then? Like, were your professors Dutch people that were teaching in English, or were they also international students or international
Um,
professors?
they were international. Of course, I would say the Dutch professors made up the biggest group, but there were professors from Belgium, from all parts of the world. Yeah.
And you mentioned that, like, the thing that you were studying had something to do with team building. It was in the umbrella of HR or something.
Yeah, so in my 20s, I tried pretty much every single career out there. I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do, and I've always had this interest and passion in teaching. I've always volunteered and tutored and taught. But teaching, especially in the San Francisco Bay Area, it's extremely difficult to survive financially. You don't get paid a lot in the US. But I found out you could teach in a company. It's called learning and development. Think of corporate training. So I have a cousin who is a mentor, and she used to head HR in many companies, and she told me, hey, you should check out something called learning and development. And so it just so happened that the university had a program in learning and development. Now, again, it's a very niche type of program. Most programs are human resources. That's what learning and development falls under. So they actually had a program specifically for learning and development. So I was like, is this also another sign?
So it was like, it was its own thing there. It was
Yeah.
prioritized enough that it was actually its own kind of, not faculty per se, but its own area of study. Interesting. And working in an international environment feels like it would also fit that type of study as well, right? Bridging the gap between people. I think that would be a good skill to have, especially in an international working environment. Is the Netherlands, is it an international country to start with? like in terms of the demographic there?
Um, yes and no. It depends on where you are. If you go to a place like Maastricht, it's an international student city because it borders Belgium and Germany. Um, any student town you go to in the Netherlands, it's very international because what brings people to the Netherlands all over Europe is because many of the programs are in English. So it allows people to, go there and just study. If you go to Amsterdam, it's extremely international. Yeah, I believe like half of the population could be international or foreigners. I think there's like something like over 200 ethnicities and nationalities there as well. A lot of European headquarters are based in Amsterdam, a lot of multinational companies. So a place like Amsterdam is very international. The Hague is also very international as well. So it depends on where you are in the country. If you go to any big city, you'll see a big diverse population. Also, again, if you look at the history of the Netherlands, you have a lot of people from Suriname who came to the Netherlands, the Indonesians. And you have a big Moroccan and Turkish population as well. So I would say overall, the Netherlands is quite open and there are people from around the world. But it depends on where you are. If you go to a small Dutch town, you won't see much diversity there.
So, was your original plan to leave the Netherlands after you graduated?
Um, my original plan was always to work abroad. That was always my dream. I wanted to go live and work abroad. So after my program, I wanted to find a job in the Netherlands. Because again, my original plan was like I wanted to study in the hopes that this would be my gateway into working abroad in a different country. So after I graduated, yeah, it's also easier for students to find a job there because you get a 1 year visa to look for a job if you study in the Netherlands. So yeah, my plan was to look for a job.
Now, I would imagine that if you came to the end of your master's, a year later and didn't like it, you probably would have looked elsewhere. So there was something about the Netherlands that did confirm that for you, that that was a place you wanted to end up in. What was it that you enjoyed about your initial time there?
Yeah, so I grew up in big cities in the US, San Francisco, LA, and then I moved to this like small city of 130,000 people. But what I really liked was that feeling of being able to walk everywhere, to bike everywhere. In the US, you drive everywhere. So I remember in LA, where I lived for 10 years, I had my local supermarket 2 blocks away, and I would always take my car there. But in Maastricht, you cycle everywhere, you walk everywhere. It's very small. So I really enjoyed the walkability of a city. I felt more connected to the city, the people, the culture because you're not in your car. I also enjoyed being in a very international environment. Studying with people from all over Europe, all over the world. I also knew I wanted to work with people also from around the world as well. Another big thing is travel has always been a big part of my life, and being in the Netherlands makes it so easy for you to just travel, right? European infrastructure is built for traveling. And if you're not a fussy traveler like I am, you can take a bus, a train, a budget airline, and get anywhere in Europe within a few hours for not a whole lot of money as well. So, yeah, all these factors, and plus, I really enjoyed what I studied as well. I finally found something I really enjoyed. So, yeah, the mix of enjoying what I studied, wanting to look for a job, the travel component, walkability, the bicycling culture, the international culture made me want to, look for a job in Europe.
And in terms of traveling around Europe, the Netherlands is pretty strategically located, right? Like it's pretty much in the middle of Europe, right?
Yeah, and especially eventually I moved to Amsterdam. The Schiphol Airport was only 15, 20 minutes away, and you can pretty much fly anywhere. Also, it was closer to fly to, China to visit relatives from Amsterdam versus a place like San Francisco as well.
Now, when you first got there, was it challenging to kind of get used to a new environment and a new way of life, or were you kind of already used to that because of the traveling you had done before?
Looking back, it wasn't that difficult because one, Maastricht is a very international city, so it seemed like everyone was from everywhere. So I didn't feel like I was out of place. And two, you mentioned the nice part about being in a study program is everything is more structured. So unlike others who moved abroad for, say, work, when you move abroad for study, everything's very structured. After you find a place, which is the hardest part, you follow a program. There are events in the school that allow you to connect and meet others. So that made it easy to just move there and to start because of the structured program of being in a university. And being in a very international place made it also very easy. The other big thing is language. Everyone speaks English. So that makes it extremely easy versus going to another country where you have to learn another language right away. So,
Yeah, like I think that for me as well, it would be easier to adapt to an environment that is very international because it's more reminiscent of where I'm from. And yeah, you don't feel like you're the only one that is different, I guess. For example, my first real experience with culture shock was in Colombia. Colombia is not a real diverse country in terms of having other nationalities, and even less in the city that we were living in, which was, not on the beach. It wasn't a touristy place at all. And so, a smaller city in terms of Colombian standards. And I really did feel like I was the only foreigner there. And there's benefits to that because you're kind of thrown into the deep end. Learning the language becomes a necessity, and you can't default to hanging out with international people. And so it kind of forces you to really embrace the local culture, which I like. But it was heavy too, a few months into that, and you really start to feel a little bit isolated, from the people around you. Like you don't quite understand what everyone else is understanding, and you're a little bit behind and don't get the jokes, and that all makes sense. But then there's like an extra feeling of there's an extra weight when you're the only one going through it. Like you look around and everyone else is excelling and they're cracking jokes and they're like understanding the cultural references and the this and that and the music, and I'm the only one that doesn't. And so it does feel like an international place allows you to kind of blend in a little bit more, where like you're just kind of one of the group and you're figuring it out at the same time as someone else is figuring it out, right?
oh yeah, I have friends who moved over with their partners and even people that move over for work. And especially if you're in a place like a small town where it's harder to meet other people who are in a similar boat as you, it's extremely hard to just move there and to live. Versus for me, when you go there to study, everyone was in the same boat studying, and you're always, together. Whether I stayed in a dorm again, I went back to a dorm, so I was surrounded by students. You study together, you go out together, you go to class together. So it was pretty easy for me.
I mean, it does require you to be more understanding and open-minded to more cultures as well, right? Because you're not necessarily integrating into one culture, you're integrating into, wherever the people are from around you. And so that can, I think in diverse environments, that can also be a bit of a moving target where you're like, okay, great. This is how, these are some of the values, or maybe this is how Chinese people are. But now I'm hanging out with Mexican people, and then tomorrow I'm hanging out with Iranian people, and like it can also, you have to be more flexible and more adaptable to lots of different nationalities and customs, like something that I think about living here in Vancouver. We have a very international friend group, but everyone greets differently. Like some people like to hug, some people like to shake hands, some people do the kiss on the cheek, some people don't want to touch at all. Especially Chinese people don't necessarily love the hug, or they're a little
No.
can be uncomfortable with that. And so it's interesting how you have to look at everyone very differently and understand a little bit about where they're coming from, right, and their cultural norms.
Oh yeah, there are so many cultural differences, and again, that's also what I love. Later on, it's actually what I would teach. How do you work with different cultures? Because if you don't know the nuances of a certain culture, there can be a lot of conflict. There's a book I always recommend for those who work with different cultures. You may know this. It's called The Culture Map by Aaron Meyer.
Okay, no, I haven't heard of it.
Oh, it's if you enjoy reading, you should check it out. It's a book I always recommend to others. Erin Myers, this American professor who lives in France now, and she wrote a book about how do you work with different cultures, how do you communicate, how do you build trust, how do you lead.
And in your own experience, how did you learn those things? Was that something kind of innate to you, kind of growing up with a couple of different cultures in the US, or is that something that you learned later on?
Yeah, it's looking back, w- one positive of growing up multicultural is that I'm part of two different cultures that you could say are on opposite ends of the spectrum, Asian, Chinese versus, American, Western. So there were certainly a lot of cultural clashes. There still are, but in a way that's provided the biggest learning that we're all very different as people. So that is innate. And also, traveling has been probably one of the most powerful forms of education for me because you learn about different customs and cultures, and you think things should be done this way, but then when you're a different culture, things are done a different way. People communicate differently. People are on time. Some cultures are late. Some people are more direct. Some people are not as confrontational. So I would say first it's innate about because I am multicultural, and then through travel and meeting other cultures, living abroad, that also, gave me the best, learning experience about how to work with different cultures.
I mean, talking about cultural differences, I mean, how do you see the differences between the US and the Netherlands? Like, let's say your average American and your average Dutch person. What would be the main differences between them culturally?
The main differences, one thing that comes to mind is I would say Americans tend to be very optimistic about everything, which can definitely be a plus when it comes to a business or in life. Especially being around Americans and working in the US, when you have a problem or you're thinking about a solution, you can try this, let's do this, and let's do this fast. Let's try this. Whereas in Dutch culture, and there's no right or wrong, I find Dutch people to be a little bit more reserved. Let's wait and see. It comes from history. There's something called the Porter model. They make decisions based on consensus. So it's decision making via the group. Jared, what do you think? David, what do you think? Similar to the Japanese in many ways, where you come to a conclusion after getting input from the group. So in a way, it's slower. But you could also say, depending on the problem or solution, it can be more effective in the long run. So in a way, I've also seen Dutch people to be less optimistic than Americans, whereas Americans are, oh, let's try this, let's go big, let's fail. Whereas I find Dutch people to be less optimistic, more reserved, but more calculated as well.
So, like when you say less optimistic, do you mean that they just kind of keep their emotions in check, or do you mean that they're pessimistic?
I would say, you could say a bit more pessimistic, um,
Like they think
than
that things will
American.
fail.
Um, Let me use an example, a very recent example that comes to mind. I made a video about biking culture in the US, and I thought that this was such a, in Portland, they do this biking festival where for 3 months in the summer, there are 800 different bike theme rides, from ping pong to pizza rides to one of the world's biggest naked bike rides, but it brings people together. And I found that so fascinating. And I thought perhaps this is something the world can copy. And it was interesting seeing some of the comments from Dutch people, and they were like, "This would never work in the Netherlands." Like so many of these comments, this would never work. And so I thought, okay, this is a very specific, like, great example of the differences between two cultures, because for Dutch people, it's more like, "Oh, this wouldn't work," whereas Americans would be like, "Oh, maybe it could work, maybe it could fail, but it seems like they've built such a cool community. Maybe it's something we can try." So that was a very, specific recent example that comes to mind.
Now, when it comes to American communication, and I think Canada shares a lot of these traits as well, we do seem to be optimistic with our words. Do you think that that always translates into action, though? Like, do you think that some people just say, "Oh, that's a great idea, we should do that," but they have no intention of actually doing it?
Oh yeah, 100%. We say things, um, it goes. I'll go back to like my own example a few minutes ago. Um, I said, Dutch people are a bit more pessimistic than Americans, whereas a Dutch person would probably say Dutch people are definitely more pessimistic than Americans. So in many ways, Dutch culture, they're very direct and honest with their words. So in a way, that cuts down a lot of time. It cuts down a lot of miscommunication. Whereas I do find with North Americans, you will say things just to perhaps keep the peace. You're not as confrontational. And you'll say things like, "Oh, let's get together again." And then you never do. Um, and that can create a lot of cultural miscommunication. And, with that, that can also create a lot of potential conflict as well.
Like, do you think that the Dutch directness would create conflict between Dutch people, or is there a certain amount of buy-in where everyone understands that like that's just how communication is done?
From what I've seen and experienced, it works amongst Dutch people, because they have this shared culture of being honest and direct. It's only when you don't have this shared culture where there can be miscommunication.
Yeah.
So I find with Dutch people, it works. Now, if you're in a room with a Dutch person and, say, a Japanese person who are way less direct, way less confrontational, then there can be miscommunication. Especially with Asian cultures, you read between the lines, whereas in Dutch culture, you say things as they are.
Mm. Did you have any conflicts like that when you were living in the Netherlands? I mean, you were talking about Americans being a little bit more, less direct, I guess, let's say, versus the Dutch style of communication. Did that create any conflicts for you?
I actually didn't have any huge conflicts with Dutch directness. I actually found it very refreshing and freeing, where you don't have to read in between the lines, where people say things as they are. At the beginning, you always hear about Dutch people being one of the most direct people in the world. But when I got there, I found that, originally I thought, okay, maybe this means they're very aggressive and, maybe they're like New Yorkers, they're like mean as well. But actually, directness just means honesty. So people just say things as they are. And I actually found it very refreshing. And I wish, more people were direct. I've learned to be more direct, but of course, I'm definitely not as direct as the Dutch. But I've also learned to be more direct and honest.
It definitely has its advantages, right? Because then you're not guessing if people are telling you the truth. You don't have to say, well, they said that they wanted to go out on Saturday, but do they really want to go out, or are they just saying that to make me feel good, right? It kind of removes that self-doubt, I suppose.
It removes the self-doubt. It also allows you to get everything out. Now, of course, you're not going to say everything, but
Sure.
a lot of times you leave things inside, things that are left unsaid, which creates a lot of tension when you leave things that are left unsaid. So I found it really refreshing emotionally, where you can say things, you can express yourself, and also because the culture is very egalitarian and everyone is an equal, so you can say whatever you think to someone else, even the professor, the CEO. Now, of course, there are things you don't say, but you can be honest with, say, the CEO. There's not much hierarchy in the country.
Interesting. Like in terms of the way that you understand Dutch culture, because you lived in the Netherlands for 7 years, you said, right? 7 years.
Yeah.
So how did your understanding of the culture develop over those 7 years? Like when you think back to when you first got there in your first year doing your master's program to 7 years later, I mean, how did that develop and change your understanding of the place?
One, the direct experience studying and working with Dutch people in different cultures. Two, also my job. What I did was a lot of workshops, and that actually helped me to learn more about not just Dutch culture, but other cultures around the world because I worked for international company delivering trainings from communication to how do you work across different cultures. And so that allowed me to learn even more about the Netherlands, Dutch culture, other cultures. And then starting a YouTube channel and making videos about Dutch culture and life allowed me to research and look into the country with a different set of lens, a more analytical and science-based lens. And by learning more about the culture, I if I go back to my 20s, my big question in life was what makes a good life? And the reason I changed career so many different times was because of that question. And what I've learned about what makes a good life is there are things that are within our control, things like our values, our relationships, the work that we do because we spend so much time at work. But there's also this external factor where we live, the structures and systems that we are part of that influence our lives a lot. These are things like healthcare, education, that, of course, they contribute a lot to our lives. They can also add a lot of stress to our lives too. So I learned that, yeah, of course, where we live, our environments shape our well-being, and it answers the question, what makes a good life as well.
Yeah, I mean, talking about some of those social programs like healthcare, the U.S. is not known for having a lot of them in comparison to other places. How do the Netherlands do it differently?
Taxes. um, and I say that because when I first went to the Netherlands, I knew about certain things. I knew about the higher tax rates. That's actually one reason that potentially prevented me from staying in the country because I was comparing salaries, working in Amsterdam versus a place like San Francisco, and comparing tax rates as well. Um, the Dutch do have higher tax rates, but you do see where the taxes go towards things like social programs, infrastructure. So the big difference is you see where your money goes towards. From my experience in the Netherlands, you do pay taxes, but they go towards things like healthcare, education, the roads. It's a safer country as well. And so I've also learned to be grateful for the taxes that I pay. Now, do I still enjoy paying taxes? It depends. But at least in the
Mhm.
Netherlands, I see actually where my taxes go. And something like healthcare, you pay 150 euros, 200 euros per month for healthcare, and you get a really good healthcare plan with a deductible of 400 euros, and it's simple and it works. Versus now I'm back in the US, and oh my goodness, it's like a, wild, wild west. It's a big puzzle, right?
So the Netherlands doesn't have free healthcare. They have a like an insurance-based system.
Yeah, it's not also free as well, but it's definitely universal and affordable. Most people will only pay 150 euros a month for a plan, and that's it. Um, Now in the US, it depends. I can't give you a straight answer for that, right?
Well, and I think in the US, I mean, it seems like the procedures are also more expensive. Like to get a surgery or whatever could cost a ton of money in comparison to other places. Is that true?
100%. I mean, I've seen personally have seen medical bills that are in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. And if we didn't have health insurance, right, that would be even with health insurance, that's a big scare. But the bills here for medicine, for procedures, they are like, I don't even know, like 10x, 20x, 30x, 40x more expensive than what you would pay elsewhere.
Like if you're getting something that you value and it's being paid for by your taxes, I think most people are happy to pay those taxes because, like you said, you can see where your money is going. In some places, it seems like they have higher taxes but don't offer the same services, and that's where you can find some kind of discontentment among taxpayers. I think California, for example, where you're from, relatively high tax rates, right? In that state particularly, but no free healthcare, not a lot of public transit options, no free education. So where is the money going in California?
That's a good question. Where is the money going towards? Well, in the Netherlands, I could actually say, I do see where my taxes go towards. It helped fund my education in the Netherlands. I paid higher fees, international fees, but education is funded also by taxes, healthcare. Look at the roads, look at the safety of the country. I could actually see where my taxes go towards. So when I paid my taxes, sure, it was high. It could be high, but you see where they're going towards. So I was okay.
Hmm. So, I mean, despite the reasons, I mean, you're mentioning some reasons that the Netherlands might offer a higher quality of life in comparison to the U.S. But you've moved back to the U.S. now, right?
Yeah.
What informed that decision?
I had a family emergency last year and I wasn't planning on leaving. But for me, I've always tried to live a values aligned life, and values change over time. Family has always been extremely important to me. So, yeah, unfortunately, due to a family emergency, that's what brought me back to the US. And I'm, grateful to have a home in California. I've always loved California as well. But yeah, it was a family emergency that brought me back.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. That's yeah, I mean that's one of those unifying things where no matter where you go in the world, being away from your family has a lot of challenges, right? In times of emergency and otherwise, that can be a real challenge because most people don't have the privilege of moving with their families to another place, right?
Yeah, and that's, probably the biggest challenge most internationals and expats face when they move abroad. It's just being so far away from family. But, luckily nowadays with digital technologies, it's easy to FaceTime, to call home. Also, traveling back, there's a direct flight between California and Amsterdam. So, it's not too bad, but still, it is very far.
How long is that flight?
I believe it's around 10 hours, 10, 11 hours.
Okay, yeah. I mean that's quite a trek, 10 or 11 hours.
Yeah, it's still a trek. It's a trek I've made quite often, so I can't say I'm used to a 10 to 11-hour flight, but it's doable.
So, like, but if you were to take a step back and look objectively at the Netherlands and the U.S., I mean, would you feel comfortable saying which one you think is the better country for the average person? I mean, I say better country. I know that's a loaded term. I guess a higher quality of life. Like, all things aside, let's say you could move with your family. Where would you rather live? Maybe that's a better way to ask that.
I do think for the average person, because studies have shown that for the average person, the quality of life in the Netherlands is one of the highest in the world, and it is higher than the US. So I would actually say if you look at the average person in the Netherlands versus the average person in the US, the average person in the Netherlands has a higher quality of life. There are a lot of studies that show this as well. So, and I do see why. The US is a great country, and there are a lot of things in the US that I value. The US is a great system if you're extremely ambitious about your career. If you're in a highly paid profession, you can make a lot more in the US if that's your goal. If you're in business, and I've met a lot of entrepreneurs in Silicon Valley who came from Europe who tell me it's way easier to do business in the US compared to Europe due to less regulations and being in an ecosystem like Silicon Valley. But that's also not the average person. The average person isn't an Elon Musk or a corporate CEO. So the US and is great if you're in that top 10, 15, 20%. But if you're talking about the average person in the Netherlands has a higher quality of life.
Yeah, I think that's an important distinction that you're making between wealthy people and like your kind of middle class or even people living in potentially in poverty or a very low income household because they have completely different needs. Like if you're wealthy enough, if you're making enough money, then the whole idea of taxation for services stops making sense because, well, I can just pay out of pocket. I don't need the government to offer me any services because I can do this myself. And if you have enough money, suddenly now you don't care about things like a pension. You don't care about things like worker comp, or like if you lose your job, are you going to be compensated in the meantime until you find another one? Having enough money kind of supersedes those things. But if you're a poorer person or someone who can't afford all of those luxuries, then suddenly they become very, very important. And yeah, and like you said, most of us are not in that kind of upper level of income. Most people are somewhere in between. And so that's really where the distinction or the comparison, I think, becomes, more accurate.
Yeah, and you bring up a good point. You mentioned enough. The biggest difference, in my opinion, between the two cultures is in the Netherlands, it's about having enough. In the US, it's a culture where it's about more. Now, right or wrong, it depends on you, but that's a big difference between those two cultures. in the Netherlands, you can't make that much money. You can make enough money and you can live a high quality of life, but you're not going to be a Jeff Bezos or an Elon Musk. In the US, the sky is the limit.
Right.
And for many, that's the dream, that potential that you can go from here and end up here. You can make lots of money. It's a bigger risk as well, but you can achieve these big dreams and make a lot of money. So in the US, the culture is really about more and more. And that works for some people. Now, for other people, a culture of enough works for them.
I mean, if you live in a culture of enough, so I'm okay not making as much money to have a better quality of life, to have some services that maybe wouldn't be available to me in the US. I'm okay with that. But a part of my quality of life is that I want to travel to other countries. If you were living in the Netherlands working a full-time job, would you be able to make enough money to have somewhat of an international lifestyle?
Yeah, and I was pleasantly surprised by that, where you could be working in you know, a job such as, let me think of a job that comes to mind. You could be working at a restaurant and still live a decent life in the Netherlands because they're paid, a living wage in that country. The Dutch actually have the shortest working week if you average it out in the developing world, 32 hours per week. And that's because a lot of people work part time. But even then, you could be working 32 hours, but still take several vacations every year as well. And this, I know people, a lot of people actually who work 32 hours, 36 hours, and they take 4 or 5 vacations every year, because they have a lot more time. That's what the Dutch do have, and many Europeans. They do have a lot more time, and they have enough to take those 3, 4 vacations as well.
Okay, yeah, because you're talking about paid vacations, paid time off, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so you'd still get paid while you're away, and then you might have a little bit of extra income to do the trip as well. Yeah, it's always a little disheartening when you see like the average vacation time for so many European countries in comparison to North America, where it's like people are taking like 8 weeks off in a year, and in Canada we get like 10 days, 14 days, maybe 2 weeks. That seems like it would contribute to a much higher quality of life just in and of itself.
Oh yeah, vacation days. I mean, the US is the only country that doesn't guarantee vacation days to employees. Whereas in Europe, people get minimum 20 days that are guaranteed by law. And especially now it's summertime, and a lot of my friends in the Netherlands, they're away somewhere, out of office. And so, yeah, it depends on what one values. Especially in a place like Silicon Valley, people value the grind. They value building something big, and that works for them. The lifestyle in Europe is more about time. That's what balance means, right? It's not just about work, but you can balance out your life with work, your personal life as well.
Yeah, in terms of finding a place that matches your values, something that my dad says is internal versus external geography. Like, is the place that you're in externally matching what's going on internally for you? And I think that's a good way of looking at it. We can pick and choose. Hey, is this aligned with my values or does it not? Is there someplace else that would serve me better in the lifestyle that I want to have? And one of the privileges that we have as being Canadians and Americans is that privilege of mobility because of our passport. We can make that choice and say, yeah, I'm going to go to the Netherlands, and yeah, you need visas and stuff to do that, but those are available to us in a way that most of the world doesn't have that opportunity to do, right?
It definitely is a privilege, and it is very true what your dad says, that there are these internal values and external values, and sometimes you get to a point in your life where these internal values don't match the external values, and it gets someone to question. But it's something we're not taught to think about, right? What are our values, the internal values, and also what are the external values of the environment that you're in. There's a lot of studies that show the biggest predictor of your well-being is the environment that you're in. So it makes sense to think about what are the values of the environment, the system that I'm a part of, and what are my values as well.
Yeah, and recognizing that, at least here, where we live, we do have the opportunity to change that. I think that even with the Canadian and the American passports, most people will just end up, where they grew up. That's the easiest. Everybody, you understand the culture, you speak the language, your family is there, your friends are there. It makes sense to hang around. But we don't often consider what we might benefit from or what we might gain by going somewhere else, right?
That's true. I know plenty of people who, grew up and have stayed where they were born, and that's completely okay. I also have talked to friends who, were born in a place, stayed in a place, but are thinking of, what else could there be? But it's not so easy as well to get over that hump and take the leap to try something new. But there is that possibility. It's one of those things. If you don't know, you won't know unless you try.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And you are someone who took that leap. And so this has been, a very interesting conversation for me, learning a little bit more about Europe and your background. So thank you for doing this, David. I appreciate it.
Yeah, no, thanks for your time as well.
Absolutely. My pleasure. And before we wrap up, though, let people know how they can find your content online.
Yeah, I have a YouTube channel. I believe it's like just my name, like David Wen. You can search for it, and I make content about Dutch and American culture.
Awesome. I'll put links in the description and people can check it out that way as well. All right. Thank you so much. And I'll talk to you later.
Cool. Thanks a lot, Jared.